The dragon had paused, so Edward interjected. Mother and I have been discussing the nature of gods recently, Akatosh, and she thinks that poetry would be a godly activity. What do you think about that notion? I am not so certain that I contribute to anything to the gods, Edward. They are an example of an unbounded problem, of course, but also their characteristics are just not very well known to us. But surely one can determine things about any being that is a god. Akatosh replied, I do not think we can at present. They are not like the Daedra who have a nature that is with them at their birth. That is, the Daedra capabilities are inherent in them, and not are the result of any changes that have occurred to them. Willow interrupted. Akatosh, we can determine that the gods have a few basic characteristics, can't we? Edward added, of course, Akatosh, they are powerful beings who can perform acts that are incomprehensible to us, that in itself must signify their difference. Akatosh nodded and replied, I understand your point of view, but to a farming community on Tamriel in our southern lands, that could also describe how they would perceive me. Perhaps that is attributable to the fact that they seldom see a dragon nowadays, but it also does not mean that I am a god, neither does it mean that I am not a god. Willow giggled and said, of course you're not a god, Akatosh. Edward smiled, nodding in agreement. Akatosh replied, how do you know, Willow? I can understand that you would guess that I am not a god, particularly since I am a dragon. He grinned and then continued, but how can you know that I am not a god? Edward scoffingly replied, well, I know that I'm not a god anyway, and I certainly have never seen you perform any godly acts. Akatosh, you also don't seem to have any worshippers about either. The companions were smiling and generally agreeing with this, but Akatosh responded, but that does not mean that I have no worshippers, nor does it mean that I cannot perform any godly acts. It just means that you have not seen either of these. I am not yet certain that gods and goddesses require worshippers to maintain their existence, and as I said, I can perform magic that would look like godly acts to many Tamrielians. But the gods must have worshippers, Akatosh, said Alaria. That's how they get their sustenance, or whatever it is that allows them to continue to be godly. Oh, husband, you must know more about the subject. After all, you made a god of your brother Sephin. I did no such thing, Meralin responded with a touch of indignation. His godhood is between him and his worshippers, among whom I am numbered. I did establish a temple cult in his memory, and anyone with the worldly means could do as much for anyone, living or dead. That alone is not enough. Maybe it helps facilitate matters, but I don't think it is truly necessary. I know no more of it, but if you want my opinion... He paused politely for confirmation that it was indeed still solicited, as elven etiquette demanded if one was giving an opinion at length. He continued, there must be something, well, godly in the person's soul, or essence, or whatever part it is that does not die with the body. I know not whether that capacity is innate in the person from birth or conception or quickening, where it is that soul and body are wedded for a lifespan, or whether great deeds and great generosity might breed it, enlarging the soul and transmuting it, so to speak. We all change and grow with each passing day, with every breath some more than others. What else is life about? He went on without pausing for an answer to his rhetorical question, probably for fear that he might get one. In other cases, gods seem to arise from a locality, a mountain, or a spring, or wood, or a collection of localities, such as Tamriel itself. Perhaps places, like persons, have souls, some greater than others. This place might produce a god or a Daedra, or maybe it already has one or more. As it changes, so do its gods and Daedra. I think that maybe they can choose to resist the change or aid it if propitiated. He looked at Akatosh inquiringly. The dragon had stopped fighting the new gods, he said, but would he go so far as to worship them? That speaks to the question of whence gods arise, but source is not nature. Of that I know as little as the rest of you. Maybe less, since the question does not truly interest me. The gods are, my worship of them benefits me and mine. It is sufficient. Akatosh did not respond immediately, and Alaria refused to be distracted. But suppose such a cult were established and worshippers provided for one of small, mean spirit, would that spirit not become a god? I suppose it might be done if one were determined enough and had a sufficiency of means to pay worshippers to perform rituals without spirit behind them. Maybe that's where small mean gods come from, wife. Maybe Daedra? Maybe I'll raise a cult to thee and see what happens. Are you calling my spirit small and mean? Allie glared at him. Only by comparison. You don't fancy yourself a goddess, do you? You might make a Daedra, though. The experiment might be a bit too chancy. Could I just mourn you for a century or two instead? I'll think on it. What about you? You've deeds enough to qualify for godhood, surely. Although if you plan on many more, such you may not outlive me. I'm doomed to be Rathium, living and dead. It's a godhood of a sort, but what a sort. Don't begrudge me on my long lifespan. Think of me doomed to the eternity in the gloomy Ebonheart council chamber, listening to the internal wrangles. Small wonder the dead Rathium pulled the place down and the live ones 20 years ago, thus causing my brother and my mother to join their number. The dead Rathium must have welcomed the century and a half of respite while the Nords held Ebonheart. But your brother Seven was killed too, as well as your brother King Cruthis. And Seven wasn't Ratham. And your mother's son, being your mother's son and not your father's, if I have the story straight, that's why he got his own temple, Edward said. So why did they kill him too? The story sounds very Daedric to me. You'd have me justify the way the gods to you, would you? I think they act for ends we cannot see, and slay the just and the unjust together. But not that I label any of my kin as either, not altogether. We see only the means. So how can we judge? Gods too face choices. I do not think their power is supreme. They can overrule nature on occasion, as can any mage, yet they, like mages, are in the end bound by it. And their overrule must answer other rules still, and in those, whatever they may be, I think lies the answer to your questions. I think it's not something men and women may know while living. Agatar smiled and replied, It is not so easy to describe the gods, is it? This is true even though, myself included, each of us think that we have a mental picture of what godliness means. On the other hand, the gods and goddesses certainly do exist, and I also believe that there is a connection of some sort between them and the Daedra, and other connection between these entities and the power associated with performing magic. The priests of Chilianos have been calling this power Magica, said a stranger who joined the group. Akatos replied, Greetings, Bard. Please allow me to introduce Geoffrey, a wandering poet who has been visiting our village for these last few days. The companions greeted the wood elf newcomer, some rising to their feet to do so according to their individual customs, then all resumed sitting, or sprawling about, and conversing. A number of priests are theorizing that the gods and goddesses live on another plane, as do the Daedra. There is some debate amongst these priests as to whether they share the same plane of existence, or whether each has their own. And some of the Elysian priests claim that we can visit these alternate planes in our nightly dreams, added Beach. Edward asked, Why doesn't someone just ask a goddess or Daedra about this? Geoffrey chuckled and replied, Well, most of us are not able to do so, to be so thoughtful when confronted by one of these beings, Edward. There is a common belief that the gods and Daedra are as reluctant to discuss their own natures as dragons are to reveal anyone's true name. Edward looked quizzically at Akatosh, but Beach stated to Geoffrey, Well said, Bard. And that pair shared the slightest of smiles. Beach then said, Do you know what the resolutions of Zenithar has been saying about the gods and magic? This magic power, or magica, is just the power generated by the existence itself. When it becomes focused by living beings through natural processes, then it becomes accessible to the gods and goddesses as worship power, which is the next level of magica. After receiving some from their worshippers, the gods can then concentrate it up to god-level power, the true magica. The gods themselves can't generate the mid-level magica, since they are dependent on it for their own existence, but they can convert it to magica, which can then be used by mortals to cast spells. This magica is usually dispersed widely across the planes, but there are areas of greater or lesser concentration due to interferences with the dispersion process. When a goddess loses his worshippers, her inflow of mid-level magica is decreased, so she in turn produces less god-level magica. with less magicka under her control for providing to worshippers or dispersion. Her influence is decreased in the mortal planes. Of course, the converse is also true. In the extreme, she receives nothing and is relegated to a state of stasis, barely existing from the ordinary magicka generated by her few remaining concentrated lands, zones of influence, and so on. Beach continued. On the other hand, Daedra receive very specific or modified mid-level magicka from a few mortals with specific areas of interest. And these Daedra are normally tied to very specific circumstances. Because of their nature, they gain much more power from their small worship base, but the gods, with their much broader base, generally have greater overall power, even though the amount of concentrated worship that they receive from any one source is much less than a Daedra's. Most of the magicka that the gods process is dispersed into and throughout the universe, no longer under their control, and thereby making it available for everyone. It's not really something they do consciously, but as a natural process that happens automatically. In other words, just because they are divine. Alara said, I think that magicka is simply available to sentient beings. Although the gods in Daedra could facilitate its usage, I would think that the gods in Daedra have other influences on us as well. Because not everyone has spellcasting ability, maybe in those alternate planes it's actually existence, and not sentient entities that radiates magicka. Just as the stars give off life in our dimension, I just assume that magicka is out there in the ether, or maybe sentient consciousnesses automatically tap into an alternate plane as they sleep. I think that everyone has some supply of magicka, but most don't know how to use it very well, or else they adopt a way of life that inhibits or forbids its use. Maybe certain gods in Daedra serve as facilitators for the entire process, that is, both obtaining and using magicka. But how do priests heal and cure and bless? Is magicka involved at all, or do they invoke their goddesses directly? Sias said, I am not sure that magicka is used. Perhaps that is yet another capability involved here. This capability would be unknown at this time, and maybe even unsensed. But I feel fairly certain that somehow it is a godly force that they are employing. Then Jeffrey responded, Sias, I believe that magicka fills the universe of planes. All things are infused with magicka to one extent or another. In this regard, magicka is attracted to some people and things over others. And some people with talent or training can control and even release magicka in new forms. There may be other sources of magicka available by tapping into alternate and other worldly planes. There is also the possibility of alternate planes that are entirely void of magicka. Regardless, certain beings of great power, such as the gods in Daedra, can not only control magicka, but can see, absorb, and transfuse magicka to and from objects and people. By employing this ability, worshippers of these beings are sometimes capable of greater acts of magic than they could accomplish others. Also in this way, some items sacred to powerful things sacred to powerful beings can be said to be holy, with additional amounts of directed magicka provided by gods or goddesses. Magicka items fall into two main categories by definition: items that draw on the surrounding magicka to create spell-like effects, and items that hold magicka in reserve for their own eternal effects. Normally, magic items which absorb magicka, giving increased abilities to their wielders, only affect themselves and are considered to use internal magicka. In some areas where great amounts of magicka have been used, the surrounding may be completely devoid of it. This, of course, negates the ability of beings to produce magic effects in these areas, although gods in Daedra carry their own supplies of magicka, as do magic items that do not depend on the use of surrounding magicka. Alara said, we have been investigating some rumors and stories concerning something that might be called anti-magicka. I think that the presence of a powerful Daedra with whom you weren't in tune could cause interference with spellcasting, maybe even cancel out existing spells. Ugh. This is so long and superfluous to read, but I'm still doing it. Perhaps particular Daedra simply favor thief or warrior types, or some goddesses and their priests might frown on competing magic in certain areas, for example in locations dedicated to them, so that unauthorized spells could interfere with their rituals. Willow asks, can Daedra supply magicka? And how about both a god and a Daedra being nearby? Wouldn't they sort of nullify each other's powers? This might be the cause of an anti-magicka effect. I've experienced an anti-magicka zone myself, inserted Myth. It felt a lot like the casting of a spell like Dispel Magicka. At the time, I thought that a truly powerful spellcaster could still effectively cast spells, but their resulting power would have been much reduced. I didn't get a chance to test this out, though, added Myth with a smile. We could assume that certain powerful spells, creatures, and even magic items might actually drain the surrounding area of magicka, replied Jeffrey. This could be extended to places where great amounts of magic energy were once gathered and expended. For example, in ancient temples where great spells were cast, or battlefields where powerful mages contested, perhaps certain metals or stones could act as absorbers of magicka, allowing for whole structures of anti-magicka zones. If so, you might be able to wear an amulet made out of anti-magicka material and gain a good advantage against spellcasters. Perhaps the purity of the material used would allow for better and better magic resistance. Akatosh spoke. Dragons have been long interested in the anti-magicka effect, naturally enough. We have found some amulets that appear to act as magicka absorbers. They might contain something like negative magicka, in which case they would attract any stray magicka floating free in the local area. They are made of a stone or mineral resembling marble. It is very rare but could be extracted and shaped by skilled craftsmen. For example, I'm sure that the dwarves could have worked with this material. They might have made these amulets, or even that statue that I once saw. Oh, it was taller than any of you humanoids. Regardless, in these mountains we have found deposits scattered throughout the halls and tunnels at random, sometimes deep within the walls. Consequently, one appears to go in and out of these anti-magicka zones of varying intensities with little or no warning. I have been imagining that this material works almost automatically. It seems to reflexively absorb magicka if given a chance to. However, we cannot rule out the possibility that they have been magically charged somehow. Perhaps this happened long ago, but the charge has somehow remained. Moralen asked, how would this amulet affect its wearer or be immune? Maybe a blocking spell could be developed and then cast to shield the wearer from the effects of the substance. Moralen then asked, but Akatosh, getting back to our earlier discussion, what do you think of the speculations concerning the connections between the gods and goddesses, Daedra and magicka? Akatosh replied, I think there are many truths that we do not know, and perhaps there are some truths that we are not meant to know. Moralen asked with a smile, all right then, I've always wanted to know this. Considering the shape of your mouth and teeth, how do dragons manage to speak the humanoid language so clearly? Akatosh paused and carefully responded, why, in much the same way that we can fly, even though our wings are not naturally strong enough to support such heavy torsos. Speaking of dragonflight and sunsets, Smith said, rising to his feet and squinting into the red-gold eastern sky, we have a visitor, Dragon Lord. That is not a bird. Akatosh's head came up, and he too scanned the sky. Tension grew in him, and one by one the companions rose, watching as the distant dot grew nearer and resolved itself into the largest dragon they've seen yet. Matilda! Akatosh exclaimed. She deigns to bestow her presence upon us. His wings lifted and unfurled, and the companions broke and ran for cover as he took flight. The two dragons wheeled through the sky, spouting great gouts of flame against the purpling sky. They're fighting, Edward cried. What does it mean? Who is Matilda? I do not know who she is, son, Morley replied, but they do not fight. You behold a dragon greeting ceremony. The pair lit beyond a rock outcropping out of sight. Should we go greet the stranger too? Edward asked. Nay, Myth said, they'll let us know if our presence is wanted. Look, even the other dragons stay away. It was true. Dragon heads had poked from the caverns to witness the event, but none of them had taken wing, and now they were retreating to their hordes within. The companions ambled back into the meadow together and built a fire as a chill wind had sprung up. The elves sang an evening hymn to the stars, deftly weaving the dark elf version with the wood elf form. Alara added her voice to theirs, but Mats and Edward and Silk and Saya sat silently. They couldn't manage elven music of this kind. Jeffrey had a particularly clear, sweet voice, Edward thought. Akatosh returned presently, smiling in satisfaction. Matilda's going to join us here, at least for a while. He was actually glowing in the dusk, each scale giving off a golden radiance. Is she your queen? Edward asked, feeling very small and human. She just is. Maybe she'll want to meet you all someday. I hope so. Until then, well, I don't talk about other dragons, you know. To which Edward blinked in surprise and then surmise, and the discussion dissolved into jokes and songs for the remainder of that clear and beautiful evening. Oh, we are finally done. Holy crap. You know what? The next book is called Legal Basics. I'm okay with that. Oh, when's the next like big series I have to read? Please tell me they're all done. Oh. So you have to read more about Baron Zaya. If you remember, there was the biography of Baron Zaya, and this one's called The Real Baron Zaya. But we got like quite a few. We got like a couple months before we get to that. But we're almost done. We're like over halfway through the Daggerfall books, and then we'll be going to Morrowind. So, and some of these I think go into Morrowind. So, we'll probably we'll skip those that we were not rereading books we've already read. So, anyway, I hope you guys enjoy. We will be starting the typing ASMR videos next week. We're going to start in March. That way I kind of have like a month to kind of rate, okay, this is how these videos go. So, and if those, for people who have been here for a while, as you know, typing ASMR is just me typing. Usually it's a script of some kind. I'll probably speak about what I'm typing, and then I'll do about 20-30 minutes of typing. So, but that'll be starting next week. So I'll see you guys then. Have an awesome day and a good night.